So yesterday, Stephen Miller told reporters the administration is actively looking at, which means absolutely going to do, suspending the writ of habeas corpus to detain and deport migrants without judicial review. I mean, he cited the Constitution's suspension clause and called current immigration an invasion. Now, habeas corpus is, in fact, a cornerstone of individual liberty. A lot of people say this about a lot of different freedoms. This one is the real thing. It's the freedom in your person, a fundamental one, from anyone who wants to abuse their authority, especially a state actor. It's so old that we're not quite so sure where it comes from. Yeah, it's in Latin, but there's a lot of relatively modern legal concepts are in Latin. This one might have started in Latin and never left. I mean, it predates Magna Carta. It predates the origins of English common law. It might be and is probably as old as the Roman court system. And it's a command, right? Not just a principle that needs to be unpacked. It says what it means. Habeas corpus. Produce the body. Give me the person now. Fast forward to us. It's one of the only individual liberties uniquely and expressly written into the 1787 Constitution that emerged from the Philadelphia Convention. You know, where those nationalists were not terribly inclined to specify any individual right, yet right after extending the slave trade until 1808, you get to that one. It's first on the list. In fact, it's the only one on the list. The privilege of the writ of habeas corpus, then you get to bills of attainder and ex post facto laws. And by the way, in terms of your very first act of resistance, if you haven't joined the resistance yet, pick up your copy of the Constitution and then start to read it. And if you have any questions, ask any one of us, but get it and carry it around. Keep it in your back pocket because your first weapon against these folks is knowing what your rights are. I also, for good measure, have a mug that has a disappearing Bill of Rights on it. You put hot coffee in it and then your rights disappear. It's a gift given to me by my students. Do they know me or what? In any case, these guys in 1787 Philadelphia that hated the idea of a Bill of Rights so much that they were willing to go ahead and blow it up rather than put it in, kept habeas corpus in the body of the Constitution. Article 1, Section 9 makes the point unmistakable. The privilege of the writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended unless, when in cases of rebellion or invasion, the public safety may require it. And again, there might be some language here that the regime is using. Invasion, public safety requires it, but it's in Article 1. Article 1 is the powers of Congress. Congress alone can weigh those conditions, not the president. Otherwise, that would be in Article 2. So maybe we just need to send one of these to Stephen Miller. No, it doesn't matter. He doesn't care what's in the Constitution. And our history confirms that power rests where the Constitution says it rests. When Abraham Lincoln in 1861, he actually unilaterally suspended it at the very beginning of the Civil War. It sparked not a little bit of outrage. And in ex parte Merryman, Chief Justice Roger Taney, an otherwise odious individual, yeah, he's the Dred Scott guy, he ruled that move unconstitutional. What did Lincoln do? He ignored Taney. Congress later, like I think a year later, carved out a narrow temporary legislative exemption for Lincoln, justifying it after the fact, saying that, oh, well, now it's okay with us. Ulysses Grant used the authority once in 1871 to break the Ku Klux Klan in South Carolina. Talk about a much different approach than this regime. But that one was authorized specifically by Congress beforehand. And no president has suspended the writ since. FDR didn't do it when he incarcerated Japanese Americans during World War II. He didn't. Which shows you how a government can violate individual rights of Americans without erasing the text. It's all in the interpretation. You raise the specter of fear and you point it at a group as the cause of it, almost anything can be justified, and that's a through line in American history. And then after 9/11, the Supreme Court restored habeas to Guantanamo detainees, rejecting the Bush administration's claims of unchecked detention. So it was a modern reaffirmation of judiciary review over executive detention. At least the Bush administration complied. So this regime's play should be familiar, though, to anyone who's been paying attention. They reinterpret invasion to mean immigration, taking civil enforcement and converting it into grounds for emergency and potentially military rule. An emergency that allows for the suspension of any part of the Constitution. They've been banging this drum since day one. Federal judges, including several appointed by Trump, have rejected that logic, but it doesn't matter. It's an argument of convenience anyway on the part of Miller and company. It's not fact. So what any court says to these guys is likely to make very little difference. And then of course, the patriot myth. Got to cover some of our lanes here. Offers no cover for them. During the Revolutionary War, the British Parliament did in fact pass a law allowing for the suspension of habeas corpus in North America, but it was never applied. Even before the war, during the rise of the revolutionary resistance in the 1760s and 1770s, the Patriots continued to raise the specter of unlawful detention, but the British never actually did it. But that didn't mean it didn't happen. Why? Because the Patriots did it. It can't go without saying that 20% of the population being unlawfully detained in chains is a colossal destruction of civil liberties. But for the Patriots versus other white people, the historical record is saturated with large-scale detentions without trial. It was their go-to play at the end of the resistance movement and throughout the war, particularly by revolutionary governments against suspected loyalists. There's one such case that had, I think, an especially significant role on American history, and not just American history, but on global history, particularly on global resistance history. In 1775, Massachusetts patriots arrested and then imprisoned, without charge, without trial, without sentence, a suspected loyalist, and threw him into a jail in Concord, Massachusetts. Decades later, in that same Concord jail, a guy named Henry David Thoreau would later spend a memorable night, also as a prisoner of conscience. The Loyalists' experience in 1775 was a major influence on Thoreau's thinking about liberty of conscience, generating in him a foundational distrust of the Constitution and resulting in a little pamphlet called Civil Disobedience, which has informed people from Mahatma Gandhi to Dr. Martin Luther King. The Loyalist was Thoreau's great uncle, and the source of his freedom, not a patriot court that realized he had rights to protect, a dramatic midnight breakout by Thoreau's own grandmother. It's a hell of a story, but you're going to have to read my books to get it. In any case, that proves the main point. The Patriots' own actions serve as a powerful historical warning against abuse of authority and disregard of the rule of law in order to achieve some sort of ideological expedience, which is what the Patriots were doing. Because this regime's rhetoric is characteristically clumsy. They are not masters of nuance, right? The plan seems to be pretty clear. Erase the court's role, hold people indefinitely, bury them in an incarceration system, and then represent the result as constitutional. Represent everything as constitutional. After all, presidents have done it before. Lincoln. But if that line falls now, as part of the ongoing trajectory of this regime, there might be no meaningful curb on its expansion of power. So the choice is ours. Do we treat habeas corpus as the non-negotiable limit it was meant to be, not just in our time, but it seems for all time? Or accept that in the United States of 2025, that history ends. And the executive decides who gets the law and who disappears outside of it. Go get your copy. Put it in your back pocket. Read it.